There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Waiver.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, we covered the Titan Submersible the other day, and many other true crime people covered it. And I think it's still a trending story. There's a lot of interest in it from a lot of different reasons, a lot of different angles. We never saw, and we still don't see, that someone's going to be charged criminally with this case. I would think that's a big stretch, especially since the owner of the company went down with the ship, so to speak. And it would be tough to charge the company with this when the person mostly responsible for this went down with it. So we weren't looking at that angle, but what we really were looking at was the human story behind this. And of course, the most important thing are the 5 individuals that lost their life. Stockton Rush, of course, the owner of Ocean Gate Expeditions, clearly a smart man, however, somewhat reckless in this incident, ignored a lot of the danger. But we'll get into more of that later on. Hamish Harding, also an aviation chairman, a billionaire, another real smart guy. Paul Henri Nogelet, a Frenchman who'd been on over 30 expeditions to see the Titanic. So obviously a smart guy, an experienced guy. And then we had Shahzada Dawood, and unfortunately his 19-year-old son, who apparently gave this trip to his father as a Father's Day gift. Don't forget this a little excursion cost $250,000 a person. Not cheap, all right? And for this, you know, in this incident, apparently the people on this submersible lost their lives. According to the Associated Press, the deadly implosion of the Titan submersible raises questions about whether the vessel exploring the Titanic wreckage was destined for disaster because of its unconventional design and its creators' refusal to submit to independent checks that are standard in the industry. All 5 people aboard the Titan died when it was crushed near the world's most famous shipwreck. The U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Marger said Thursday, bringing an end to a massive multinational search that began Sunday when the vessel lost contact with its mothership in the unforgiving North Atlantic. The Titan, as we know, is owned and operated by Ocean Gate Expeditions, and it first began taking people to the Titanic in 2021. It was touted for roomier cylinder-shaped cabin made of a carbon fiber, a departure from the spear-shaped cabins made of titanium used by most submersibles. The spear is the perfect shape because water pressure is exerted equally on all areas, said Chris Roman, a professor at the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography. Roman had not been on the Titan, but has made several deep dives in the Alvin, a submersible operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Massachusetts. The 22-foot long, 6.7 meter, 23,000 pound Titan's larger internal volume, while still cramped with a maximum of 5 seated people, meant it was subjected to more external pressure. Elongating the cabin space in a submersible increases pressure loads in the midsections, which increases fatigue and delamination loads, said Jasper Graham Jones, an associate professor of mechanical and marine engineering at the University of Plymouth in the United Kingdom. Fatigue, he said, is like bending a wire back and forth until it breaks. Delamination, he said, is like splitting wood down the grain, which is easier than chopping across the grain. Furthermore, the Titan's 5-inch thick hull had been subjected to repeated stress over the course of about 24 previous dives. Each trip would put tiny cracks in the structure. This might be small and undetectable to start, but would soon become critical and produce rapid and uncontrollable growth. OceanGate promoted the Titan's carbon fiber construction with titanium end caps as lighter in weight and more efficient to mobilize than other deep diving submersibles on its website. It also said the vessel was designed to dive 4 kilometers, 2.4 miles with a comfortable safety margin, according to court documents. But carbon composites have limited life when subject to excessive loads or poor design, which leads to stress concentrations. Yes, composites are extremely tough. Yes, composites are extremely long-lasting, but we do have issues with composites and the fact that composites fall in slightly different ways than other materials. OceanGate was also warned that a lack of third-party scrutiny of the vessel during development could pose catastrophic safety problems. So, folks, that's from the Associated Press. And many people, especially people in the industry, this is a very small community of explorers and millionaires and people like James Cameron, the producer director of the Titanic, that somewhat is obsessed with this area of deep diving. In fact, as James Cameron has dove deeper in a submersible and probably anyone else in the world. To join me tonight, it's just not me, guys. I have a retired attorney, mother of 5, actress, and a frequent guest on Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, Melanie Little.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your Sunday evening with us, or Monday morning, I guess, depending on where you are. Carol from Scotland, I see you. Bob T in the chat says, holding my breath in the deep end is as far as I'm going. And I got to say, I'm with him on that.
Well, that's for sure. You know, I think that this just has so much interest worldwide. And I think a lot of it has to do, of course, there's so much interest in the Titanic. Yeah. And it's so much even, you know, I guess, you know, you could call it spooky or whatever you want, that the Titanic went down in a similar way, not the same way, according to we'll play James Cameron a little later on, but with a captain that ignored danger. Right. And I'm speaking about the Titanic's captain, who was told, you're going into an ice field, you know, exercise extreme caution. And instead, he steamed straight ahead at full speed. And ultimately, we all know what happened. But you wonder why someone would ignore, and again, in this case also, ignore warnings from other people about the dangers that existed, especially with this submersible, and how it was designed and what it was made of.
Yeah, I mean, like Robbie says in the chat, Endeavor always has a price on a risk, right? I mean, he believed in it so much that he was willing to, I mean, there's a lot of interviews where he says, you know, safety, pshaw, the hell with safety. Safety just gets in the way. And, you know, now that all of these older interviews are surfacing of his, you know, we get a little bit of more insight into what kind of a guy he was, and how we can see that he would not heed these warnings and safety risks to the detriment of 5 or 4 other than himself lost souls, which is sad.
Absolutely. You know, Melanie, you think even about, we all drive a car, right? And just to put it in the most simple terms, imagine it wasn't a law to get your car inspected once a year. Could you imagine what people would be driving out there?
Do you know that I believe in some states you do not need to have an inspection. In some states, you don't even need to have insurance to drive a car.
That's scary. That's absolutely scary. But I'm just saying, in New York, say,
right,
if you didn't have to have your car inspected, I mean, people would drive with no brakes. People would drive with bald tires. People would drive with all kinds of mechanical defects, and there'd be no way. So, I mean, that's the lowest common denominator. This is even more scary because you're really not going to inspect and have a submersible subject to certification because it'll take too much of your time, of your precious time.
I mean, a submersible. Yeah, that's going 2.5 miles underwater.
Absolutely. And so that's going to take too much of your time. But how about now you took all the time away from the folks that were on this submersible, and they have no more time left because they all died,
Mm.
basically because of you, because of your irresponsibility. And I think that when people watched us the last time, some people were demanding criminal charges. And I mean, that remains to be seen. I don't see it, but there could be. And of course, everyone is, and we spoke about this last time, everyone
Right.
is obsessed with the legal ramifications of this, the civil lawsuits. And we covered that, Melanie. You said they had an extensive
Extensive
waiver.
waiver. If I could interject something also, I did just see yesterday a story where the NTSB is joining with Canadian authorities to investigate possible criminal charges. I don't know what they can be, but I guess based on public pressure and public outcry, they are going to do some sort of a criminal investigation. So that'll remain to be seen.
Amazing. I want to play a little bit of James Cameron being interviewed by Anderson Cooper here.
First went out to sea on its way to the Titanic. We're talking tonight about the 5 lives lost, also about the vessel itself and the questions surrounding it, namely the decision to build it out of carbon composites and not certify its safety as other such vessels are. Back now with Deep Sea Explorer and Titanic director James Cameron. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that this debris field is just 1,600 feet away from the bow of the Titanic. Obviously, people think about the bow of the Titanic and they think of your film Titanic with that iconic scene on the bow. I heard you earlier to kind of talk about these two captains and a kind of a similarity that you see, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
I think there's a great, almost surreal irony here, which is Titanic sank because the captain took it full steam into an ice field at night on a moonless night with very poor visibility, after he had been repeatedly warned by telegram, by Marconigram, by radio, during the day that that's what was ahead of him. And so I think we're also seeing a parallel here with unheeded warnings about a sub that was not certified, where the entire deep submergence community actually, or not the entire community, but a large number of them got together to write a letter to Ocean Gate, the company, and say, we believe that this could lead to catastrophe. It was less a criticism of the engineering than of the process, but it contemplated the fact that the engineering probably wouldn't pass muster from a certification bureau. And so they were trying to head this whole thing off. It was our worst nightmare. I mean, all of us in the deep submergence community, people like myself that pilot subs and design subs, implosion is obviously the specter that looms over us all the time. But because of that, that's the thing that you engineer for the most years in advance. So that should never be the problem. I've never believed that if I was going to have a serious problem in a sub, that it would be implosion. Maybe entanglement in a fishing net, maybe a fire from the electronics. Hard to rule those things out. Implosion, absolutely not. Especially.
Melanie, this is like the issue implosion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most, I would imagine, submarines, or nuclear submarines, they're made of steel, right? Iron and steel. And they have a methodology whereby they can check that steel for its integrity over time. Because I think over time, with the accumulation of the unbelievable amount of pressure that's pushing on those hulls, it can, like wear away like anything else, or weaken. Like he compared it to when you bend a wire back and forth, and at some point it snaps. Right. And I don't know if that's a great analogy, but you can understand it. So this carbon fiber was a material, I think, that most people in this industry, it was new. No, people didn't trust it because, again, over time, like we just described with the wire moving back and forth, which someone else brought up that analogy. Mm-hmm. It had, look, as you know, it had taken at least 10 or 12 trips, I think, down there prior to this happening. So it was obviously an accumulation of wear and tear on the hull.
Subject to tremendous pressure when you go 2.5 miles down the ocean. I mean, he's talking about this deep submergence community, which is a terminology that I've never heard. I didn't know there was a deep submergence community, but I don't think it's a very big community. Seems like a very small community. And he's saying that, everyone in this community was so concerned that they all wrote a letter to him. And I've seen a copy of the letter. It was, pretty scathing. I've also heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that James Cameron was so obsessed with the Titanic that he made the movie Titanic just so he could make enough money to go down there and see the actual wreckage.
Wow.
And now it's coming up on its 25th anniversary, and it's the highest grossing movie of all time, I believe, still. So that's interesting.
I think people are also obsessed with the ocean. To me, the most powerful force in this world is the ocean. And if you don't respect the ocean, you can be a victim of the ocean. We've
Right.
all found that out, even as far as body surfing on the
Right.
beach. I recently learned that. I was in Florida, and I usually don't go into the ocean if it's rough. And it was a little rougher this day than I usually would allow my old bones to go into. And I went in and I couldn't get past. The waves were breaking in about 3 feet of water. And I was having a hard time getting past. I was getting the crap kicked out of me. And I'm
Yeah.
talking about slammed. That hadn't happened to me since I was like 15 years old at Jones Beach on Long Island. And I was like, this isn't supposed to happen to me,
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because when I was a kid, we used to spend our summers at Breezy Point. Anybody who's from Queens or, Rockaway knows Breezy Point. And we were taught as children, respect the ocean. You have to respect the ocean, and you're taught at a very, very young age that if you get caught in a riptide, you have to swim, parallel to the shore to get out of a riptide. So
Not even swim, just float.
growing up, right?
Because
Yeah,
you-
right.
You can't fight the riptide. You're supposed to just stay there, let it take you out of the riptide.
Yeah,
That's where people drown, is when they try to fight the riptide.
right.
Just lay on your back and float away.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
It's easier
true.
said than done, though. So let me play more of the James Cameron.
Especially with modern finite element analysis and computer-aided design.
What should be what should we learn from this? Because obviously, deep water exploration. I mean, there's a pretty great. I mean, I don't know if it's great, but a very good safety record with people who have done the certification, people who have really studied this. Do you worry about this having an impact on the continued exploration?
I do. Look, I'm not worried about exploration because explorers will go. And I'm not worried about innovation because people will innovate. I'm worried that it has a negative impact on, let's say, citizen explorers, tourists, but these are serious people with serious curiosity, willing to put serious money down to go to these interesting places. And I don't want to discourage that. But I think that it's almost now the lesson, the takeaway is, make sure if you're going to go into a vehicle, whether it's an aircraft or a surface craft or a submersible, that it's been through certifying agencies, that it's been signed off. Every day we trust our lives to engineering. We step into an elevator. We make an assumption that somebody somewhere has done the math properly and it's all been certified properly. We should take the same precautions when we get into a submersible, even if it's at a resort and we're only going down 300 feet or 1,000 feet. I'm a partner in a submersible company called Triton. I'll say that up front. Triton, not Titan. And Triton has a perfect operational safety record across 20 vehicles and 10,000 hours of people diving to depths up to 1,000 meters. It can be done, but it requires rigor. And I think all of us in the community now that our worst fears have happened, and we know why it happened, I think largely, it puts us now on even more alert to be disciplined and to really think about the ethics of it. There's a lot of countries where subs are diving all over the world. You're not going to have regulation everywhere that solves this problem. It's really more that we have to just accept a standard of practice that we don't encourage operators to work without proper, ABS or German Lloyd's or whatever it is, certification.
Melanie, one of the things he's talking about too, and just within our regular everyday lives, we talk about, say you went to a carnival with your kids.
Right.
Would you trust a lot of these carnivals you see that are traveling throughout states, and you see these guys missing an eye, missing a leg, and they're running these machines that look like they haven't been serviced, And you wonder if the company even, I wouldn't let my kids go on rides like that. Even at some of these amusement parks that are, the big ones, I don't trust them either. I really don't.
Do you ever go parasailing in the Caribbean? These guys are smoking joints like this fat all day, running that boat, putting people up on these parasailing things. Like, you don't know if that boat is even going to make it. God forbid anybody's checked the lines of the parasail that you're about to go on. I mean, we do it every day. But listen, I want to ask something else. You're paying $250,000 to do this trip, right? In some parts of the country, that's the price of a home. When you buy a home, you would have your home inspected, right, before you would purchase it. So I would think if I was going to spend this kind of money on a trip like this to go on this crazy, by the way, looking thing that I've seen soapbox derby cars that look safer than this thing, right? We've seen it. We've seen the Atari controller and the crazy wonky handles from Camper World. And wouldn't you do your due diligence if you're paying $250,000 per person to go on this thing?
Yes,
I would.
And these people, there they are on the screen. They're educated people. They're smart people. They're wealthy people. And yet they took this huge chance, I guess, for the thrill of it. And unfortunately, they paid with their lives. Crazy, right?
Yeah. I mean, did they tour it before they went on it? Because it just looks unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
As
come on,
soon
he's
as
got
they
one
had
button,
the
like an elevator. He's like, oh, don't look, you need just one button and an old Nintendo controller or an Atari.
I would turn around and leave right then when I saw the Nintendo controller was a controller for the Submersible.
I mean,
I
for
think I would have to
$250,000,
leave.
I'd like a comfortable chair at least. And I'm sitting
Yes.
crisscross applesauce on the floor of this thing, all jammed in there with a curtain separating you from a toilet that has a plastic cup in it. I don't know.
No, I don't think I'm paying $250 for that.
No.
The Coast Guard Rear Admiral today was talking about the unforgiving environment at those depths. Can you just talk about that feeling of being down there? I mean, I can't believe how deep you have gone into the ocean, 3 times deeper than the Titanic, I think you said.
Yeah.
What is that feeling of being down there?
Well, I always say you'd have to take a backhoe with you to go deeper than I went anywhere on this planet. That is a feeling of remoteness. I knew when I made that dive that there was no hope of rescue. There literally was no vehicle in the world, no matter if you could fly it in, no matter if I could survive long enough on my life support system. There was no rescue. I had to self-rescue if I had a problem. And we thought about that for the 7 years that we spent building the sub. And I designed a lot of the safety systems myself, knowing I was going to be in that sub, in terms of how to drop the weights. If I was incapacitated, the weights would drop themselves after a certain period of time. Many communications beacons for when I got back to the surface. If I had drifted off someplace, I'd have been picked up by satellite. They would have reported my position. I had radio.
See, Melanie, that's one of the things we were talking about. A lot of people said, oh, GPS will not work, but the beacon they're talking about rises to the surface.
Right.
And
if it works properly.
Yes. And that reports exactly the last location of the person who's in the sub.
He looks like he's sitting in like a clothing dryer. I mean, that's how small this thing is. If you're claustrophobic at all, I don't understand it.
No, I
don't understand the direction of it.
I don't think I would like that either.
I had visual beacons. It wouldn't have required an aircraft search. They'd have found me pretty quickly. So you think all that stuff through, but the feeling in the moment, it's almost a sacred space. It's a place where there's nobody else there. It's just you and yourself and a sense of deep time. You're looking at something that no one's ever seen. It's been that way for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. At Titanic, it's different. You feel the presence of the tragedy, and I think that's the lure. I think that's why people want to go and experience it for themselves, to remember history. I think people go to battlefields, to Gettysburg, to Normandy Beach, and all those things to remember history and to take it in and make it part of their lives. And I don't think that's You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, some people don't like, they say it's a grave site and that sort of thing. But I think it's important for us to remember. But here's a case starkly today where the collective we didn't remember the lesson of Titanic. These guys at Ocean Gate didn't, because the arrogance and the hubris that sent that ship to its doom is exactly the same thing that sent those people in that sub to their fate. And I just think it's heartbreaking. I think it's heartbreaking that it was so preventable.
James Cameron, I'm sorry we're talking in these circumstances, but I appreciate the level of detail and expertise that you bring to the conversation. So thank you very much.
You know, I understand what he's talking about. I'm not specifically James Cameron, but when people talk about the Titanic as being a grave site, you know, and myself and Mike Geary and Phil Grimaldi, we felt that way about Ground Zero, of course, and about that this was hallowed ground, and this was where nearly 3,000 people lost their lives, you know, and so there's a certain amount, a large amount of reverence, I think, that has to be paid there. And even now, with the World Trade Center Memorial built on top of it, it's and if you haven't been there, it's quite a beautiful memorial. But I understand why relatives and people that lost loved ones on the Titanic could feel this way. Like, leave it alone. It's a gravesite, you know. Stop going down
Sure.
there and inspecting it. And I totally understand that. Your thoughts, Melanie?
You know, the one side of the argument is, yes, it is a gravesite. It's hallowed ground. It's where a lot of people lost their loved ones. The other side of that, it is a piece of history, you know, and people go down to shipwrecks all the time. And I mean, I saw an interview today. We were talking about it earlier. A woman who actually survived the Titanic. She was 7 years old, and she said the same thing when they interviewed her when the remains of the Titanic, or the ruins, were discovered. And she said, "I just hope that they don't bring it up. I hope they don't raise the ship, because that's my father's gravesite." And I couldn't understand that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would think that won't even be a factor. I just think
Yeah,
it would probably crumble if they did try to raise it.
right.
And you're right. It should, that's something that should just stay the way it is, and not
But I
be
could also see
tried.
how it'd be a source of fascination for people to want to see it.
Yeah. No,
But, you know me,
absolutely.
I'll just go to a museum for history. I'll go to the
Yeah,
museum where I'm safely above ground and water.
absolutely. I'm going to play a little bit of this expert talking about the Ocean Gate tragedy here, because, again, we here are not experts on submersibles or dives, but we have a brain and we can report on this and bring the experts in.
And Underwater Vessel Committee and the president of Hydrospace Group Incorporated. Good afternoon, William. Thank you very much for being with us. I want to begin by getting your reaction to the news of the fate of the Titan and the people who were in it.
Yeah, hi Marcia. Good afternoon. Yeah, this is very tragic. This leaves everyone with such a deep sense of loss for family, for friends, for colleagues. You know, this is historic in our industry. This is the single biggest tragedy we've had since the beginning of our industry, which we figure is 1960. This has never happened. We've never had an implosion of a submersible. We've had a few incidents in the 1970s, and maybe a total of four fatalities. And here we are in the year 2020, in a single event that has more than everything else combined. So it is a deep sense of loss we have.
How big of a setback is this? And there are already calls for the industry into touring the Titanic wreckage should just be shut down, that really there's no need for anyone to go that deep down, that everything you need to know about the Titanic you can read about, you can watch it elsewhere, that these types of excursions and journeys are just not necessary, too dangerous.
There's an argument for that, Marcia, for sure. But look, we've made hundreds of submersibles. We have 10 submersibles that go that deep. that dive every day deeper than this. The Titanic's at 4,000 meters. We dive down to 6,000 meters and more all the time, year after year for decades. We know how to do this technology. It's just expensive, and with that expense, does it warrant the tourism? I mean, at some point, there's you say, well, it's just too expensive for people to afford. We can do this safely. The legal aspect, should people be around these heritage sites? That's been a legal debate that's been going for 20 years. I suspect that will continue, but it is certainly not on the back of the submersible technology. What we're here to say is the engineering adventurism is what we need to be careful on. And the reality is this was an illegal submersible by definitions here. It could not have operated in the United States or in Canadian waters. The Coast Guard would not have let it dive.
Why?
Without.
How come?
Because it requires certification to carry people. And but the bypass was, well, we're international waters and you can't make me.
Did you have specific concerns about the type?
Melanie, that was no accident that they were brought to the location in a Canadian flagged ship, and they were licensed, I believe, in the Bahamas, and they did the dive in international waters. None of that was accidental. That was all because they would have been subject to the laws of the United States if they don't. Well, obviously they were diving for the Titanic, but that's where it is. But the other moves they made, obviously to avoid, the certification process, being on a Canadian flagged ship, being licensed in the Bahamas, all of those things were to avoid the certification process and the legal process. Oh, how about even, Melanie, let's talk about this, having insurance. No one would insure them. Right?
No, nobody would touch them. They couldn't get insurance. So there was no insurance for this vehicle. And they absolutely 100% skirted all the regulations. They knew it had to be certified if it went out of a certain place. If it was, they knew exactly what they were doing. And they chose not to do it. So again, do your due diligence before you pay lots of money to go on some sort of an excursion or any type of experimental anything. You have to have some responsibility when you're going to pay that kind of money. You can't just believe everything that somebody tells you. Oh yeah, it's safe. Okay, sure. I have a bridge I want to sell you. There's got to be some responsibility too on the person that's paying this kind of money, not to just rely on the word of this guy who's not well regarded in his field. And it was well known that he was not well regarded in his field.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I would think that a good rule of thumb is if a vehicle or an elevator or anything isn't licensed or inspected, you probably should avoid the hell out of it, right?
I'm with you on that.
There's a reason it's not certified. There's a reason it's not insured. There's a reason it's not inspected.
And elevators have to go through regular inspections, and you'll see the inspection certificate right inside the elevator when you get in there.
Exactly.
Anybody who works in a building or lives in a building knows it.
Absolutely. I'm just going to go to Chris. So, folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime stories from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube. It's free. Hit the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you like us, and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel members. You see the folks in the green font. They are our supporters, our friends, our family, and our subs. And we've been growing this channel for about the last 4 years. And we appreciate all of our fans, all of our subscribers that support this show. So, Melanie, it's like we keep learning more and more about this. And the investigation, of course, is just beginning. And I believe it's going to be a joint investigation by the Coast Guard, the NTSB, and I believe Canadian authorities are going to investigate this. And I think they're all, I mean, would that entail also, again, doing dives down there to recover?
I would imagine they're
debris?
going to try
The-
and recover. There was some sort of voice recording device on that vehicle, so I imagine they want to try and recover that to gather as much evidence as they can to try and figure out what happened, exactly what happened. And instead of hypothesizing and surmising about what happened, they really want to figure it out. So yeah, they're going to have to go down there, recover the
Fuzzy-
debris, whatever they can find.
Absolutely. Fuzzy Doxy, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Thanks, Bill and Melanie. And thank you, Fuzzy Doxy, for that $9.99 super sticker. Yeah, I think that this investigation has to go forward for the civil liability, even though not just according to you, it's a fact that they all signed waivers. And whether
Right.
those waivers mean a thing after in consideration of what occurred and what was the ground level of when these certifications were signed. What I'm referring to is there was no inspection of the submersible. It was not licensed. It was not insured. There was no certification. Does that nullify these waivers that the passengers signed?
Well, first of all, the company is registered in the Bahamas. Any lawsuits would have to be brought, according to this release of liability agreement, which I have and have highlighted and is 3 really long pages, would have to be brought in the Bahamas under Bahamian law. There are a lot of countries that don't even allow you to sue for negligence. I do not believe the Bahamas is one of them, but there are countries out there that do not allow negligence lawsuits at all. This release is incredibly comprehensive with regard to I may die, which it says about, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. It says in here that it's experimental. I mean, it goes on and on and on that I consent to this. I know. I waive my rights. I indemnify you. No, I can't sue you. My family can't sue you. Nobody can sue you on my behalf. I'm going to assume full responsibility for the risk of bodily injury, disability, death, and property damage due to the negligence of any released party while involved in the operation. Then they go on to agree to indemnify and hold harmless OceanGate expeditions from any liability. I mean, it just goes on. I understand that such risks simply cannot be eliminated from any operation. These risks include everything, and death. About 4 or 5 times. So, waivers can usually be overcome. But again, like we discussed the other night, there is no insurance. I believe the company had filed for bankruptcy. I do not believe that there is a pocket to collect from. I believe that all of the people that sadly perished in this incident were very, very wealthy. And I'm sure that they have life insurance and other ways of providing for their loved ones. I just don't think that a lawsuit here is going to be successful. And, it's never going to bring the loved ones back. Going through litigation can be very, very stressful. It takes a very, very long time. And some people just do not want to deal with it. They want to, put it away and move on. And, whether this waiver would hold up in the Bahamian court of law, maybe, probably not. It probably would hold up. Sorry, probably would hold up, but
Melanie, Gina G from the chat asks this question. And Gina, it's not a stupid question. This may sound like a stupid question. I don't think it does, but are or were physicals and mental evaluations completed before this expedition? Are they required? Do you know
for
the answer to that?
the passengers or for the pilot?
I think she's referring to the passengers. And
Look, I think anybody who had the money was going to come. Was anybody who was willing to pay was going to be allowed to go and sign the waiver. Was going to be allowed to go on this thing. In fact, there were some articles that came out the other day that there was a father-son who were all set to go on this expedition. The son got cold feet. He convinced his dad not to go. This guy called Stockton Rush and said, listen, my son has cold feet. He thinks it's dangerous. He doesn't want to go. Stockton Rush flew to this man's house to have a meeting with him to say, oh, please come. I'll knock $100,000 off each of your tickets and you can come for $150 each. And they still declined And now they're doing interviews because they're realizing that they saved their own lives by having a little bit of cold feet.
Absolutely. Gina G meant passengers, so we were correct in what
Okay.
we assumed she meant. She did mean the passengers. I just wanted to address another thing. Throughout human history, we always admire explorers, and explorers take huge risks. Look at Orville and Wilbur Wright. How many times did they fail before they got that plane up in the air? And people considered them to be quacks. People that the first, not now, it seems like now there's almost a regular tour to climb Mount Everest, and there's bodies strewn all over the place that'll never be taken down from that. But early on, 20, 30, 40 years ago, I don't know when the exact first person scaled Mount Everest and put the flag up there, but it's still a real accomplishment if you do it. But now it's not recognized as a huge, explorer because so many people have already done it. Admiral Byrd with the North Pole. Some of these were life risking events people went. So we have a history in this country, of course, of admiring explorers and people that do things like this. So how could we try to shut down people that wish to do deep dives in a submersible? I don't think we can do that.
And look, I was not ignoring you before. I was looking on my phone to Google when the Challenger explosion happened. This was a vehicle or a vehicle. What other? This was a thing that was inspected by some of the most, the smartest people in the entire world. And it exploded. 1986 is when that happened, by the way.
Right. NASA engineers built that. And
it exploded 73 seconds into its flight, killing everyone on board. So, even the things that are inspected to the nth degree can still have problems. I don't think anybody could have predicted that would happen with the Challenger.
But I think people want to know that risk is reduced through certain things, like, of course, what we're talking about, certification, inspection.
Oh, yeah. But, if you read this release, I wouldn't sign this.
No, which would mean you would turn around and say, I'm out. I'm not doing this.
Give me my money back.
Give me my money back. I'm out. I'm not going to take this risk, and it is a huge risk,
And a lot of people are chiming in about, I feel really bad for the 19-year-old boy. He really didn't want to go. His dad gave it to him. He bought this trip for his dad because it was Father's Day, and his father really wanted to go, and he also didn't want to go, but he did go. And, unfortunately, 18 years old, you're considered an adult and you can sign your own contracts and waive away your rights. And, did his father convince him to do something that was totally unsafe? Maybe. I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that question, but yeah, my heart breaks for him and his family.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me finish this report
Titan's design and the construction.
Well, it is not focused on the design. The source of the letter, and I drafted the letter in 2018 after our conference, and many people from, we meet once a year, bring all the stakeholders together, and the consensus was, this is very disturbing the way the company is going. And the main issue was not so much the design as the strategy of the company to bypass the basic rules and standards that we apply within the industry to build submersibles and to certify them and put them through all the paces to make sure you've done everything to make sure it's correct. And that it's like, well, this level of regulation is stifling innovation. It's a common war chant out there in technology. Everyone wants to be a technology disruptor. And I mean, I personally have a problem with that term in general. It might work for a keyboard, a mouse, a chair, but for submarines, it's not appropriate. It is not trying to be heroic on finding shortcuts. This is very difficult stuff. We are so proud. I mean, humanity is at a point, it's amazing that we can do that. and we're quietly doing our duty. And it's a duty of care. Nobody from the outside can double check us, right? And that's one of the professional responsibilities we have. And one we take very seriously here within the submersible community all around the world. And that was one of the concerns too, is like, okay, look, it's this adventurism here in bypassing these rules. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for the people that are involved in this. And it can make us look like we don't know what we're doing. And the reality is there are regulations that control that, the Coast Guards do, but it was a clever bypass, but it certainly wasn't wise. And we were very concerned. And the deepest tragedy is that this was avoidable and preventable.
So that's, it's amazing. And, they talk about the submersible community and how safe they've been. And they've had so few accidents in one incident, 5 lives were lost. And it was all because, they circumvented certification. They circumvented procedure. They circumvented inspection, all in the name of time and trying to do these dives without anyone, looking over their shoulder.
Yeah. And it's almost like this guy was saying, our company is safe. If you want to do this, come to our company. We'll take your $250,000. Robbie in the chat says, Melanie, I'd rather take you to get fish and chips by the shore. And then somebody,
hey, this is not a dating site.
I thought it was cute. I thought I would address it.
Well, we love humor too, Melanie.
Robbie,
we can't be so straight, right?
We have to lighten it up. Otherwise,
that's right.
We talk about true crime all the time and horrible things happening, and it's very grueling, right? We have to lighten it up on occasion.
Absolutely.
Mostadek 48 says in the chat, the engineers that built the boosters for Challenger said they were not certified for the temperature at launch. NASA overruled them. I don't know if that's true, but that's an interesting fun fact. And I don't recall because, I wasn't alive in 1986.
Yeah, right. Now she's becoming a comic right in front of your face.
I know. Yeah, fun fact. I also went to acting classes with Anderson Cooper when I was about 13, 14 years old in the city. So,
well, he's on CNN and you're on Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. So,
I know, crazy, right?
Who made it bigger?
I actually was on CNN one time for a case that I had for I can't even remember what the case was about. And I said, Anderson, don't you remember me, Melanie, from the neighborhood playhouse when we were like 13 years old? And he was so kind. He said, oh, totally. I totally remember you.
Oh, good.
He was a nice guy.
I want to play some footage of the Titanic, and this is one of the reasons people want to go down there.
Never before seen video of the wreck was released this week from the expedition that found the long-lost steamliner. It was 1986 when the world first saw video of the Titanic again, almost 75 years after the so-called unsinkable ship was lost to the depths in the icy North Atlantic. This week, Massachusetts Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution released 80 minutes of this never-before-seen raw video, the first ever to capture the vessel nearly 2.5 miles beneath the ocean surface. Some images are familiar, others new to the public. Among them, from the ship's haunting interior, this chandelier, still hanging, swaying in the current. Robert Ballard led the team that found the Titanic, and he was inside the small submersible that provided the first video of the wreck. This is him today.
And as we rose up after that first dive, we began to see the portholes, and it was like people looking back at us. It was pretty haunting.
1,500 people died on that maiden and final voyage, inspiring fascination and art.
I'm flying! Jack!
The wreck is decaying fast. The captain's bathtub now gone. So are these grand staterooms, succumbed to metal-eating bacteria and saltwater corrosion. Researchers say it could all be gone in decades, and so too its secrets.
And I think everyone wonders in their own mind, if I were there, what would I have done?
Incredible. Incredible, right? Again, there's pictures that haven't been seen before. This Ballard, he's one of the investigators on this now. He's one of the big names in submersibles, and here he was there. And I think some of the real heavy duty research underneath the water goes out of Woods Hole, Massachusetts, that oceanography program they have there. And some of these submersibles have they dive much deeper than I believe the Titanic is 2.5 miles down. I mean, they always talk in kilometers, and
10,000 feet. Yeah.
you and I are lost with that type of measurement. We didn't go to
10,000 feet.
school. 10,000 feet. We didn't go to school during when they were teaching kilometers. We had feet. They would, and now everything seems like it's changed over to the metric system, right?
Right. They've been trying to do it since we were in elementary school. It's not really catching on here so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you were only born in 1986, I think, right? Is that right?
Scott believed me. He's like, wow, I really feel old. I didn't hear that. I'm like, no, that was a joke, Scott. But thank you for believing me.
He didn't get it. He believed you. Also, one of the we spoke about Canada. What was their involvement in this? And they just announced today that they are getting involved in this investigation.
This morning, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, or TSB, has started the safety investigation into a marine occurrence with fatalities involving the Canadian vessel Polar Prince. At the time of the occurrence, the vessel was involved with the operation of a submersible known as the Titan, which has been reported to have suffered a catastrophic implosion, leading to the presumed deaths of the 5 people on board. Now, this morning, TSB investigators boarded the Polar Prince to examine and document the vessel, to collect information from the vessel's voyage data recorder and other vessel systems that contain useful information. We have also begun conducting interviews with the people aboard the vessel. Typically, our investigations can take 18 months to 2 years. We obviously try and do them quicker because we know everybody wants answers, particularly the family, the public, etc. But we need to take the time. With respect to how far we will go, that remains to be seen as we gather information. This morning.
So pretty amazing. And now the Canadians are getting involved in this. I would wonder now, is the ship, the Canadian flag ship, are they in trouble right now? Because
I
they
think some people might lose their jobs over this. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, not just their job. How about the licensing of their ship to transport?
Maritime law is not my specialty, Bill. But if anybody in the chat is a maritime lawyer, it is a very, very, very small subspecialty, almost as small as the deep submergence community.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone in our chat that is a maritime lawyer, but certainly it's an interesting field. But I would imagine that Canadian flagged ship is in some trouble because, again, they had nothing to do with the dive. However, they facilitated the dive by bringing the ship there, lowering it into the water, and all of those type of things. So guilt through association, Melanie?
For launching it, perhaps. You'd have to see the contract between OceanGate and that ship, I think, to really do a deeper dive into what the legalities of it are.
Absolutely.
I don't have those documents in front of me.
Folks, if you're looking for an attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe Murray's a fantastic defense attorney. He's also a retired NYPD police officer. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or you can get him on his website, jmurray-law.com. Joe is a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. In fact, he used to be a frequent guest, but I think because of this commercial, he's so busy that he has no time to come on the show anymore. I don't think that's true, but he is so busy in his law practice, and he doesn't have time to join us anymore. Melanie, one of the things I wanted to address, and it was MSNBC the other day raised this issue, and I've heard it raised in other situations. And they spoke about, should the people involved in this have to pay for the would-be rescue? And it wasn't a rescue now. In fact, it's just an investigation. And I think that's sort of ridiculous to ask someone who needs to be rescued whether they should pay for it or not, because in essence, what this reporter was saying was that, they were reckless in just going on this, on the submersible and taking this trip. So perhaps they should pay for, and again, it's not a rescue. It was an attempted rescue.
Right.
And we all know that they lost their lives. Look, John F. Kennedy Jr. years ago was trying to fly his plane, I believe, to Hyannisport for a wedding. It may have been Hyannisport or Martha's Vineyard, one of them. And he flew at night, and he wasn't qualified to fly at night because he wasn't instrument trained, and he crashed into the ocean. And our government, our Coast Guard, spared no expense, as they shouldn't have, to recover John F. Kennedy, and it turned out his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her sister. And they spent millions of dollars on the recovery of his plane, which contained his body and his wife and his sister-in-law's body. It was mentioned back then too. Should they pay for that? I was just like, I mean, when is that? I don't know. I just don't get it.
I still remember where I was on that day too. The day that plane crashed.
I mean, we all felt horrible about that.
Where do you draw the line? Do you not go try and recover people who go out in the ocean because they didn't know how to swim? They shouldn't have been in the ocean. I mean, where do you draw the line here? If somebody's in trouble, we rescue them. That's what we should do.
Right. And the people that are being rescued shouldn't have to pay for their own rescue. I mean, where does that come from? I think it's sort of a ridiculous theory. It's just like, if you put it in an extreme way too, how about on the street, gangbangers that are selling drugs and they get in a shooting and they get shot and their medical care costs $3-4 million. Who's paying for that?
We are, Bill.
Yes, exactly. So that's an extreme situation. And, they're being irresponsible by selling drugs. And, there's, as we all know, there's tons of violence in the drug trade, but should they? Well, they have no means to pay for it.
Right.
But it's sort of ridiculous that someone that's doing something honorable, maybe a little reckless,
right,
honorable, and then someone suggests that should they pay for their own rescue? Oh, please!
Oh, you should have played that clip. I'd love to see that. That's outrageous. I mean, look, you get a guy like like Jussie Smollett. Remember that whole thing? And he made up the whole story about the hate crime and all of this stuff. And then as part of his slap on the wrist, he had to, maybe pay some restitution towards the investigation and all of the money that was spent on that. I mean, that's a different story. I could see that, but not for something like this. This is a tragedy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's sort of ridiculous that I should have brought that up because the reporter was really resolute about it, and I thought it was somewhat ridiculous. I want to play a little of this from Good Morning America with Michael Strahan here.
Tour submersible, but pulled out for safety concerns. His friend Hamish Harding is among those missing on board. And first off, we got to say, Chris, thank you for joining us this morning. Our thoughts are with you, everyone on board and their families as well. And I know you were close with Hamish. Can you please tell us about it?
Yes, good morning. I think, first of all, the thoughts are really much more with the family and his close friends and families, not just Hamish, but the other 4 people that are down on the sub. All of our concentration needs to be on that right now. We've got lives at risk. It's the news this morning about them picking up sounds is good and bad news. In an ideal world, we'd have seen that the sub had come up to the surface and was bobbing around just undetected. If the sounds are coming from below the water, then that indicates that they're maybe alive under the water. But now we've got time pressures in getting them up to the surface.
Yeah, time is definitely of the essence. And you say you were one of the first people to sign up for this Titanic tour mission. What initially drew you to join?
Well, it's being a sort of a modern day adventurer, interested in pushing the boundaries of our knowledge and places that people go. Hamish and myself are both on the Virgin Galactic program to go up into space, and Hamish actually went into space about a year ago with Blue Origin. And the Titanic's obviously an iconic wreck. And the Ocean Gate had put forward this program to go down and do a 3D scan of the wreck with the view to then being able to see how it's decaying so that the wreck could be preserved. And that's it. It's so the mission specialists like Hamish going down there would have the job of either scanning, or they could be in charge of the communications up to the surface, stuff like that. So it's a chance for an expedition, exploration, and adding a bit of science into the situation.
And prior to signing up for the trip, what did you know about Ocean Gate expeditions?
Prior to myself signing up, very little. I was. It was one of these situations where a couple of guys who knew a lot more about the Titanic, and one guy was into shipping, was his business, brought it to my attention. I just thought, oh, that sounds like a great idea.
And you said that safety issues ultimately led you to pull out of the trip. What were some of those safety concerns that you had?
They did. I'm not really sure that this is the time to be going into that sort of thing. I think that the focus right now has to be on trying to rescue these people. It's not.
Well, obviously, Melanie, this report, one of the reasons I played it was because this was a person that opted out, but this was when there was still hope that they were alive. They had reported potentially hearing sounds from under there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was in fact true or not, because then there were reports that they heard, the Coast Guard heard what they thought may have been the sound of the implosion prior to this. So that may have been somewhat wishful thinking. So again, this was prior to them having the implosion.
Fair on the families and friends to be making speculation about what might have happened or how it happened at this point.
We can definitely understand that. And do you feel any apprehension about joining similar projects in the future? Because as you said, you are a modern day adventurist.
No, what you tend to do is, I mean, some people physically write it down. You think about all the risks that might be involved in whatever exploration adventure that you're going on. And then you see if you don't have an appetite for those risks, then you might not go ahead. You may try and mitigate those by bringing in some expertise from outside. You might have other risks or dangers that could be mitigated by changing the time of when you go out there. I've very recently been out. I became the first person ever to get to the pole of inaccessibility in Africa. Very dangerous situation, but by choosing the right people to work with, timings, the equipment, we made it all work. So that's what you tend to do as an adventurer. What we tend as a group not to take into account very well is the effect on our friends and family. I know that from talking to my own family, and we fully understand the risks and we take them on board, but they haven't been so involved with the process, and they tend to kind of be left a little bit in the dark. And then they're worried, and then unfortunately you get a situation like this, and it's just probably as if the bottom has dropped out of their worlds, and really do feel for them.
Yeah, we do as well. A lot of worry on the part of those families. And as we said earlier, our thoughts are with those families and those on board. Chris Brown, thank you.
So pretty amazing. Duty Ron, thank you so much for the $50 super sticker. This is for your guest, not you, Supreme Commander. Love you, Billy. Well, thank you, Duty Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
I'll tell you one thing. My guest is a lot prettier than me, that's for sure. So I can understand. And Duty Ron's got this little pink background on his.
It's cute. I think that was for me.
It's very cute. Yeah, it was for Melanie. That's right.
Stockton Rush also did another interview that I read about the other day in the Post, where he actually came out and said, I don't want to hire 50-year-old white men to work at my company because they're not as innovative as the 26-year-olds that I could get the techies, and he was very vocal about this, and it makes me think of something else. Like, was he cutting corners because he didn't want to pay very experienced, naval submarine captains to work for him? I mean, think about that.
Well, I would think that young and inexperienced might cut corners more easily than someone old and very experienced.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's cutting corners
So-
also with his payroll, He doesn't want to pay to
Well,
hire
yeah,
the
well-
experienced naval submarine captains.
Well, it sounds like true life companies. Don't they also do that, Melanie? They try to, they can hire
what I
3
hear.
or 4 25-year-olds for what they pay one 60-year-old, or
Mhm.
55-year-old, right? So
Yeah.
that's done even though we all know that there's no such thing as age discrimination in our country.
I think
As
they're
you-
figuring it out now that these young people aren't going to stick around and have job loyalty the way the older generation does. So I think it's going
No.
to backfire on them. That's a
Well,
different
here's
show.
Duty Ron makes another comment here. This case is so sad, but it's a prime example of wealth, power, and greed and cutting corners for sure. Look, we did that report a while ago on the Black Sunday incident with the fire department,
Mhm.
where they didn't have ropes to escape from a building that
Right.
lacked fire escapes and lacked basic safety protocols. And as a result, 3 firemen were killed in that fire in the Bronx. And of course, now after the fact, every New York City fireman has a rope that they bring. Whether they bring it into
Right.
every fire or not, I don't know. I can't attest to that. But they do have it. And back then they did not. And as a result, these firemen had to jump out of, I believe it was a 5th-story window.
Yeah.
And we've seen that before. Do you take death by fire and smoke, or do you jump out of a window, which maybe have a chance of surviving, but they didn't.
No.
So
That was tragic.
yeah, absolutely. Queen of ASEAN. I know an implosion collapses inward. That's why it's called an implosion, not an explosion. Explosion means out. Implosion means in. Queen of ASEAN. Thank you anyway for that information. But I was, this is a very interesting case, and we're going to follow it along as the investigation proceeds. In a real human way, we were all rooting that these 5 folks were
Sure.
saved. We were all rooting, and it goes for everyone across the world was rooting. Because we've seen great rescues before. We've seen the unfathomable, thinking, they're not going to be able to rescue, and we've seen it happen. We've seen miracles before. That's what I'm trying to say. So
Yep.
sometimes we expect miracles, because once you see one, why not? Why not there be a miracle each and every time, right?
I know. Everybody
but-
wanted a happy ending.
I think we always want a happy ending in this country. I mean, you think about, even we Americans, we go to movies and we want that happy ending,
Right.
the movie to end happily, not to be, how would you leave a theater when it ends tragically? You leave the theater like, oh man, why did I pay to watch this movie, right?
Right.
I don't need to be sad. If I want to be sad, it's
Mhm.
it's a little bit crazy. Anyway, Melanie, we've been on for about an hour and 8 minutes. Your final thoughts?
Just that our prayers go out to the families of the victims in this horrible tragedy, the families of Hamish Harding, Paul-Henri Nargillet, Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, and the family of Stockton Rush.
Absolutely. Certainly a tragic event, no matter what the circumstances. And, we at Police Off the Cuff, we first take the side of the victims, and we wish them and their souls, in this case, and their families the best, and our prayers to them. Folks, thank you very much for tuning in tonight. It's Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories, on behalf of myself, Bill Cannon, and my wonderful guest, attorney Melanie Little. Have a great night, and thank you for tuning in.
Night, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.